Discipline is the architecture of true freedom. What appears at first as restraint is in fact deliberate design. A structure without beams collapses under its own ambition. A life without discipline buckles beneath its own impulses. Many speak of freedom as though it were the absence of limits, as though the highest state of being were to move without obstruction, to choose without consequence, to indulge without resistance. Yet a river without banks does not become powerful. It becomes a flood. Its waters disperse into marsh and mud, losing force, direction, and purpose. Banks do not imprison the river. They grant it strength. So it is with the soul. To be undisciplined is to be perpetually reactive. The slightest desire tugs the mind like a hooked fish. The faintest discomfort provokes retreat. Praise intoxicates. Criticism corrodes. Such a person calls himself free because he follows his feelings, yet he is governed by them. He confuses impulse with autonomy. But what is autonomy if not the capacity to choose according to reason rather than appetite? What is freedom if not mastery over the internal forces that would otherwise dictate your path? Discipline erects the invisible scaffolding that allows character to rise. It is the quiet refusal to surrender authority to convenience. It is the deliberate narrowing of options so that excellence may widen. When you commit to rising at a chosen hour, to speaking with restraint, to training the body, to studying when others drift toward distraction, you are not shrinking your life. You are refining it. You are exchanging the chaos of infinite possibility for the precision of directed effort. Precision liberates. Consider the craftsman who labors over stone. The chisel strikes not randomly, but according to design. Each measured blow removes excess. Each deliberate cut reveals form. Marble left untouched retains its mass but not its meaning. The sculptor's discipline does not diminish the stone. In the same way, discipline carves away the excess of the self, the idle habits, the indulgent reactions, the careless words, until the essential figure stands exposed. Freedom is not the right to do whatever one wishes in a moment of desire. It is the cultivated capacity to act in harmony with one's highest judgment. The undisciplined individual seeks comfort and finds captivity. The disciplined individual accepts temporary discomfort and discovers command. There is a paradox here. By binding yourself to principle, you loosen the grip of circumstance. By limiting your behavior, you expand your authority. By submitting to structure, you transcend chaos. Observe the athlete who trains before dawn. While others sleep, he moves through repetition and strain. His muscles burn, his breath shortens, his will is tested. To an onlooker, this appears restrictive, even punishing. Yet when the moment of competition arrives, he moves with grace and certainty. His body obeys him because he has trained it. His performance appears effortless because effort has been invested long before. The discipline that constrained him in preparation grants him freedom in execution. So too with thought. A mind left unguarded becomes a marketplace of anxieties, resentments, fantasies, and distractions. It chases trivialities and magnifies inconveniences. But when disciplined, the mind becomes orderly and formidable. It selects its focus with intention. It questions its impressions. It refuses to amplify what lies beyond control. Such a mind is not imprisoned. It is fortified. Discipline also clarifies desire. When every craving is indulged, desire becomes dull and insatiable. Nothing satisfies because nothing is earned. Yet when one chooses restraint, appetite regains proportion. Pleasure becomes vivid, not excessive. Achievement becomes meaningful, not accidental. Achievement becomes meaningful. Achievement becomes meaningful, not accidental. Discipline purifies enjoyment by aligning it with effort and worth. True freedom demands responsibility. Without responsibility, freedom degenerates into indulgence, and indulgence breeds dependence. The one who cannot deny himself a trivial pleasure will not withstand a serious trial. The one who cannot govern his schedule will not command his destiny. Discipline cultivates reliability within the self. It transforms promises from fragile intentions into lived realities. There is also dignity in discipline. To witness a person who holds steady in adversity, who continues his task without complaint. This strength does not arise spontaneously. It is built in obscurity through repetition. Self-governance is sovereignty over chaos. Within every human being resides a restless assembly of impulses, appetites, fears, ambitions, memories, and instincts. They do not wait politely for permission. They surge, they argue, they demand. Anger insists upon expression. Desire presses for indulgence. Fear urges retreat. Vanity seeks applause. Sloth whispers delay. If left unruled, these forces collide like rival factions struggling for control of an unguarded state. The result is not freedom, but fragmentation. It is to stand as a steady authority amid internal noise. A sovereign does not eliminate citizens, he orders them. Likewise, self-governance does not require the destruction of emotion, but its regulation. Anger may signal injustice, yet it must not dictate. Cruelty. Desire may point toward pleasure, yet it must not command excess. Fear may warn of danger, yet it must not paralyze action. Sovereignty lies in discernment, in granting each impulse its proper measure and denying it dominion. The undisciplined. Every provocation sparks unrest. Such a person becomes vulnerable to manipulation, because whoever appeals most strongly to his emotion becomes his temporary ruler. Praise makes him bold. Criticism makes him collapse. He is carried not by conviction, but by the loudest internal voice of the moment. Self-governance establishes hierarchy. Values act as statutes that do not bend to whim. This inner structure does not suppress vitality. It channels it. Just as a well-governed state fosters prosperity through order, a well-governed mind cultivates clarity through restraint. When reason evaluates before reaction, the soul gains stability. When judgment precedes speech, words gain weight. When intention directs effort, energy gains purpose. There is a quiet power in restraint. To encounter temptation and yet remain aligned with principle is authority. To experience fear and yet proceed deliberately is courage refined. Each of these moments reinforces internal command. Each time you refuse to be dragged by impulse, you reaffirm your sovereignty. Chaos thrives in negligence. It grows when habits are left unexamined, when thoughts are accepted without scrutiny, when emotions are indulged without reflection. Is this thought accurate? Is this reaction proportionate? Is this desire worthy of pursuit? Such inquiries are not signs of hesitation, but of mastery. The sovereign self does not seek control over others as compensation for inner disorder. It understands that domination outwardly cannot substitute for disorder. Inwardly, a person who cannot govern his temper cannot truly lead. A person who cannot discipline his cravings cannot command respect. Authority that lacks self-command decays into arrogance or insecurity. But authority grounded in self-governance radiates steadiness. It neither demands validation nor fears opposition. There is also humility in sovereignty. To govern oneself, it is to acknowledge vulnerability without granting it supremacy. The disciplined individual does not pretend to be immune to temptation or agitation. He recognizes their presence clearly. Yet recognition is not submission. Awareness strengthens vigilance. Vigilance strengthens control. Insult becomes an opportunity to practice restraint. Success becomes a test of moderation. Every external event becomes secondary to the internal response. The world may present turbulence, but sovereignty ensures the chaos does not reign within. Such mastery is not achieved in grand declarations, but in repeated decisions. It is forged when you pause before reacting, when you rise despite reluctance, when you continue despite boredom, when you speak carefully instead of impulsively. Each act of governance strengthens the authority of reason. Over time, this authority becomes instinctive. Composure replaces volatility. Deliberation replaces haste. Stability replaces oscillation. The sovereign self does not drift. It directs. It does not deny emotion, but subordinates it to understanding. It does not extinguish passion, but refines it through purpose. It does not silence fear, but tempers it with courage. Through such internal order, clarity emerges. Through clarity, confidence grows. Through confidence, action becomes deliberate rather than desperate. In this ordered state, the mind ceases to feel like a battleground and becomes a citadel. Thoughts. Between what happens and what you feel about what happens, there exists a silent interval. In that interval resides your authority. They unfold according to forces vast and indifferent. Yet their power over you is not inherent in their arrival, but in the interpretation you assign them. The mind, swift and often careless, stamps events with meaning before reason has examined them. These labels are rarely questioned, yet they shape the architecture of your emotional life. A delayed opportunity becomes, in one mind, humiliation, in another, instruction. Criticism becomes, in one heart, an injury, for another, a stern tutor. The raw material. Judgment crafts the experience. When you fail to govern your judgments, you surrender to reflex. The mind leaps toward assumption, exaggeration, and personalization. A single setback is inflated into catastrophe. A careless remark is magnified into hostility. An uncertain outcome is translated into inevitable ruin. These distortions breed agitation, not because reality demands it, but because interpretation distorts it. To master judgment is to slow this process. Is this truly unbearable or merely uncomfortable? Is this genuinely catastrophic or simply inconvenient? Such questions dismantle exaggeration. They restore proportion. They return control to reason. Circumstances often masquerade as commands. They appear to dictate your mood, your reaction, your self-worth. Rain does not intend to ruin your plans. It merely falls. Illness does not conspire against you. It merely occurs. Other people's opinions do not define you. They merely exist. Meaning is assigned internally. Consider how swiftly pride and shame arise from interpretation. Praise is judged as validation of identity. Criticism as condemnation of character. Yet praise may be misguided and criticism incomplete. If your judgment attaches your worth to these shifting evaluations, you become dependent upon them. You oscillate between elation and despair according to voices beyond your command. But if you examine judgment carefully, you recognize that worth is not so fragile, nor so easily determined by passing opinion. Mastery of judgment requires intellectual honesty. It demands that you confront your own tendencies toward bias and dramatization. Yet truth often resides in nuance. To judge accurately is to resist the temptation of immediate certainty. It is to allow evidence, context, and reflection to temper reaction. If you judge it as training, endurance strengthens. If you judge it as proof of personal inadequacy, confidence erodes. If you judge it as a test of character, resolve sharpens. Mastery of judgment also refines gratitude. When you judge circumstances solely by convenience, you overlook hidden benefits. Without disciplined judgment, such gifts remain Unseen, the mind fixates on discomfort and overlooks instruction. A delayed message becomes neglect only if judged so. A neutral expression becomes disapproval only if assumed so, if interpreted so. By suspending premature judgment, you prevent imagination from fabricating pain. This discipline does not demand emotional numbness. It invites accuracy. Feelings may arise, but they need not govern. You may recognize fear without forecasting doom. You may encounter. To master judgment is to reclaim authorship of experience. The world writes the events. You compose the meaning. Without this mastery, circumstance appears omnipotent. You begin to perceive events less as threats to identity and more as occasions for virtue. Patience in delay, courage in uncertainty, moderation in success, dignity in loss. When? Serenity emerges not because life becomes predictable, but because interpretation becomes disciplined. You cease demanding that reality conform to preference. You focus instead on ensuring that your judgments conform to truth. In doing so, agitation loses much of its fuel. Reaction yields to response. Complaint yields to clarity. The mind grows less turbulent, not because storms disappear, but because exaggeration no longer magnifies every cloud into calamity. Commitment outlives fleeting motivation. Motivation is a spark brilliant, warm, and intoxicating in its arrival. It surges through the mind with persuasive energy, painting visions of transformation and excellence. They flare and fade according to mood, novelty, and circumstance. Commitment, by contrast, is not a feeling but a decision fortified by repetition. It asks whether you remain aligned with what you have chosen. Motivation visits when conditions are favorable, after an uplifting speech, a surge of emotion, a moment of clarity. Commitment remains when fatigue dulls enthusiasm, when progress appears slow, when recognition is absent. It is the quiet insistence that your standards do not fluctuate with your emotions. The distinction is subtle yet decisive. Motivation says, I will act because I feel ready. Commitment says, I will act because I have resolved to do so. One depends on internal climate. The other establishes internal law. Others collapse into postponement. Consider how often beginnings are fueled by motivation. Difficulty challenges confidence. Without commitment, initial zeal dissolves at the first encounter with inconvenience. What once felt exhilarating begins to feel demanding. The undisciplined retreat, waiting for motivation to return like a favorable wind, does not wait for favorable winds. It rows regardless of weather. It acknowledges that meaningful pursuits require sustained exertion. Mastery of craft, cultivation of character, strengthening of body, refinement of intellect, none yield to sporadic effort. They respond to constancy. There is dignity in this constancy. To rise at the chosen hour despite reluctance is commitment. To complete the task when distractions beckon is commitment. Immediate exhilaration. They produce something more enduring. Reliability within oneself. Each fulfilled promise strengthens self-trust. Each completed obligation reinforces identity. Motivation often seeks visible reward. Progress. Commitment, however, finds value in alignment rather than applause. It derives strength from coherence between word and deed. When you say you will act and then act regardless of mood, you construct integrity. Integrity is not dramatic, it is consistent. Emotions fluctuate by nature, and discouragement are not anomalies but certainties. If action is contingent upon feeling, then effort becomes unpredictable. Commitment recognizes emotional fluctuation without surrendering to it. It allows feeling to exist without granting it authority. You may feel uninspired and still act. There is also clarity in commitment. It reduces internal negotiation. Without it, each day becomes a debate. Should I act? Should I postpone? Do I feel ready? This constant deliberation drains energy. Commitment simplifies the matter. The decision has already been made. Action follows as execution of prior resolve. Mental friction decreases. Discipline becomes habitual rather than dramatic. Commitment deepens identity. Over time, repeated adherence to chosen standards reshapes self-perception. You cease viewing yourself as someone who occasionally strives and begin to recognize yourself as someone who endures. This shift is powerful. Identity anchored in commitment withstands temporary failure. A setback does not dissolve resolve. It invites adjustment. The committed individual does not interpret difficulty as a signal to abandon effort, but as part of the process he accepted from the beginning. Moreover, commitment fosters resilience. Motivation fades in adversity because adversity is uncomfortable. Commitment anticipates discomfort and remains intact. It understands that growth is not linear, that progress may be invisible for long intervals, that recognition may never arrive. Its allegiance is not to outcome alone, but to the act of sustained pursuit. In this way, commitment becomes a stabilizing force within the self. It removes dependence on emotional peaks. It cultivates steadiness. It replaces intensity with endurance. Over time, the work once fueled by excitement becomes sustained by character. Action becomes less theatrical and more authentic. The individual ceases to chase inspiration and instead becomes governed by chosen principles. Through repetition and resolve, what began as deliberate effort gradually transforms into habit, and habit into nature. Time honored through discipline becomes virtue embodied. Each dawn arrives without ceremony, yet it carries immeasurable worth. Hours do not announce their rarity, they simply pass. They do not pause when squandered, nor accelerate when cherished. They move with quiet impartiality, indifferent to how they are used. Yet within this indifference lies their gravity. Time is the only possession distributed equally and reclaimed without negotiation. To treat it casually is to dismiss the substance of life itself. Discipline is the act of reverence toward time. It is the recognition that minutes are not fragments, to be scattered, but instruments to be directed. The undisciplined drift from distraction to distraction, mistaking motion for progress. Their days dissolve into trivialities, and when reflection arrives, they wonder where the years have gone. But the disciplined approach time as a craftsman approaches rare material. They measure, they consider, they shape. Each idle indulgence, each postponed obligation, each careless hour is a small forfeiture. Discipline does not demand relentless labor or joyless rigidity. It demands intention. It asks that you choose consciously rather than react passively. It invites you to weigh the value of what you exchange for your time. When you offer an hour to resentment, what have you purchased? When you invested in learning, strengthening, creating, or serving, what have you constructed? To honor time is to align it with purpose. Without direction, time becomes a blur. With direction, it becomes architecture. Consider the disciplined individual who dedicates consistent effort to a chosen craft. Day by day, the improvement may appear subtle. The increments are small, almost imperceptible. Yet months accumulate. Years compound. What was once awkward becomes refined. What was once uncertain becomes assured. This transformation is not sudden. It is the visible result of disciplined hours faithfully invested. Virtue emerges from such accumulation. Patience is not granted spontaneously. It is cultivated through repeated restraint. Courage is not summoned only in crisis. It is prepared through smaller acts of endurance. Wisdom is not acquired in a single revelation. It is gathered through disciplined reflection and study. Time, when structured by deliberate practice, converts effort into character. There is profound dignity in this gradual shaping. Discipline transforms ordinary days into silent allies. The morning chosen for preparation rather than procrastination strengthens resolve. The evening devoted to reflection rather than mindless distraction sharpens understanding. Each disciplined decision deposits something into the treasury of character. Over time, this treasury grows substantial. Many fear the structured discipline imposes upon time. They imagine restriction, imagining that spontaneous pleasure will vanish. Yet structure does not extinguish vitality. It safeguards it. When time is governed wisely, leisure becomes richer, not hollow. Rest becomes restorative rather than escapist. Pleasure becomes balanced rather than excessive. Discipline preserves the sweetness of experience by preventing its overuse. The passage of time also clarifies mortality. Life is finite, though its end is rarely visible from the present vantage. To ignore this truth invites complacency. To remember it invites urgency. Without panic, discipline channels this awareness into purposeful action. It asks not how much time remains, but how well the present hour is used. It encourages attention to what strengthens rather than what numbs. Time honored through discipline also strengthens integrity. When commitments are fulfilled punctually, trust deepens. When responsibilities are addressed without delay, reliability forms. Others may admire talent, but they depend upon consistency. Consistency is born of disciplined stewardship of time. The person who respects his own schedule respects others as well. He understands that to waste another's time is to diminish a portion of their life. There is also serenity in disciplined use of time. Regret often arises from neglect, the neglected opportunity, the neglected relationship, the neglected potential. When time has been approached thoughtfully, regret loses much of its sting. Even failures feel instructive rather than wasteful because effort was sincere. Discipline does not guarantee success, but it guarantees dignity in pursuit. The seasons of life shift as quietly as ours. Youth yields to maturity. Vigor softens into reflection. Discipline ensures that each season is inhabited fully rather than squandered. In youth, it channels energy into growth rather than dissipation. In maturity, it directs experience into wisdom rather than cynicism. In later years, it transforms reflection into insight rather than regret. To honor time is also to recognize when to cease. Discipline includes restraint, the wisdom to stop futile pursuits, to withdraw from corrosive habits, to relinquish distractions that erode vitality. It is not merely about filling hours, but about refining them. A life crowded with trivial engagements may appear full, yet remain hollow. A life structured around meaningful effort may appear simple, yet feel profound. When discipline governs time, the intangible becomes tangible. Ideals cease to be abstract aspirations and become visible conduct. Patience is seen in measured response. Fortitude is seen in sustained labor. Temperance is seen in moderated desire. Justice is seen in reliable action. Time, shaped by discipline, renders virtue observable. The ultimate measure of a life is not intensity of isolated moments, but coherence across years. Discipline provides this coherence. It links days together with intention. It prevents fragmentation. It ensures that values declared are values practiced. Through repeated, disciplined use of time, the individual becomes unified rather than divided between aspiration and action. In honoring time, you honor existence itself. You acknowledge that each hour carries potential to refine or to diminish. You choose refinement. You choose alignment between belief and behavior. You allow patience to mature, courage to steady, wisdom to deepen. Through disciplined stewardship of your hours, your character ceases to be a concept and becomes a living testament. Time will pass regardless of your vigilance. The question is whether it will erode you or elevate you. Discipline determines the answer. When you treat each day as material for virtue, you transform fleeting moments into enduring substance. And, in doing so, you ensure that when years have gathered behind you, they stand not as evidence of mere survival, but as proof of a life deliberately and honorably shaped.